Welcome to The Author Show, where we feature new authors and books, from fiction to self-help and everything in between. You'll find it all at theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. And now let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming to the program author Chris Ancona, and he is the author of The Alignment Quotient, How to Create and Powerfully Live a Life You Love. Before I bring in today's guest, a quick reminder that selected interviews are available on our iPhone app, which can be downloaded in the App Store, as well as on TV on the Roku channel and Amazon Fire TV. Our app name on all platforms is simply The Author Show. Chris, how are you?
Doing wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
I started out as an engineer and I moved into leadership training and just noticed that there's a kind of a bunch of stuff that's missing. I got into writing in order to help bring that out to the world.
So tell us about your book.
Sure. Well, when it comes to being successful in life, we kind of heard about like IQ, intelligent quotient, and EQ, and that's emotional quotient. And we all understand these things are just not enough. So this book walks the reader through a kind of forgotten third quotient necessary, and I call that the alignment quotient. And it's basically one's ability to choose who they are and then maintain integrity with that despite their thoughts or feelings, the situations they face, their circumstances. So this book walks the reader through a journey to kind of build that skill set.
Now, who did you write your book for specifically? Who's your target audience?
Well, I wrote this book for folks with a bit of experience, maybe 25 to 50 years old or so, and they recognize they're missing some underlying kind of unifying foundation in their life that would answer the questions, who am I and what am I here for? And importantly, these are people who prefer to look at science for answers, maybe because spirituality kind of requires too much belief, or they're just not into the spirituality stuff. There are also people who are willing to do the work that it's going to take to answer those questions for themselves and live into that.
So could you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that you would say runs throughout your book?
Yeah, it's pretty simple, that you can create and build your life from a foundation that nobody can take away from you. And in fact, nobody can even touch it unless you let them.
So if you had to choose, what would you say is the single most important idea you're sharing in your book that's really going to add value to the reader's life?
Well, my readers have pointed out a lot of different ideas that have made a big difference for them. But if I had to pick one, I'd say the biggest eye-opener is we tend to live from a perspective of I have to have something so that I can do something, so I can be somebody, whether that's to myself or other people. And this way of approaching life is just dangerous, because if you lose the have, like your job or your house or your position, then you've lost who you are. In this book, I suggest that there's another way, that you can start with the be and then do what there is to do, and then you'll have a result. And with that concept, I walk the reader down a path to actually implement this kind of counter idea into their lives.
Now, if you could compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
If your readers are familiar with Michael Singer's Untether Soul, then I consider this book to be kind of a science, philosophy, and psychology-based version of that book. Obviously, being a science-based book, it's more structured in its thinking than his book. Just because you'd expect that maybe from a science versus spirituality-based book. And my book is less, I would say, feely and touchy than his book is. I get my readers to kind of interrogate what I call their meat suit or their survival machine. But they're similar in the sense that we both seek to help the reader find real and lasting freedom of their spirit. And both books have a path for the reader to walk down that requires real work to achieve.
There have been a zillion books written on this subject. In your opinion, what is it that sets your book apart from all the rest?
I've been on my own journey for about 25 years, and I did a lot of searching and testing out different ways of thinking, from religion to philosophy, and exploring scientific ideas. After all this time of kind of exploring these different ways and teaching at university and researching, I found that there's a bunch of science books that discuss the human condition and a bunch of spirituality books about how to live a life you love. but I didn't find books that brought science and philosophy together to provide a map to empower people to create a life they love using what we know and not pretending to know what we don't. So this book fills that gap, and I think that's what makes it unique.
So why did you decide to write this book? What's the purpose here?
Well, I think there's a bunch of them. Originally, I wanted to write a book that I felt would make a difference, and I became a father. And being the dad of a young child who's a bit older, you're always thinking about your own mortality. I wanted to write a book that would be there with all the things that I've learned and studied and put together, if in case I wasn't there. Then I realized that there's a lot of people that may not have had good role models in their lives that this could provide that for. And so I wrote this book to fill that gap.
So in your opinion, what do you think spirituality books lack that you're going to provide?
Yeah, well, let me give you an example. One of the big concepts is the law of attraction. And I find this idea terribly misleading. I can't imagine telling a kid from, for example, the south side of Chicago that's facing gang violence to just think positive and things are going to be okay. So I think that this spirituality approach sometimes fails to deal with the fact that bad things happen in life that we have zero control over. And in a certain way, when bad things do happen, the law of attraction may lead people to blame themselves for things that had nothing to do with them. And I understand the law of attraction has a lot of positive goals, and the scientific literature strongly suggests that positive thinking is super important. But to put a spiritual cloak on it, like it's some eternal rule of the universe, seems very misguided. I do my best to found my ideas on real scientific and philosophical and psychological underpinnings and let them lead the way, meaning my book's a path to interrogate yourself, not a book claiming to have definitive answers. So I don't suggest, for example, there's universal anything or anything that you have to believe in. And I think that's something that spirituality books lack that I can bring to the table here.
What is it that qualifies you to write a book like this?
Well, I do have 2 degrees, including an engineering degree from the University of Michigan and a master's degree from the University of Iowa. And I've worked with some of the top minds in neuroscience and social psychology. I spent a lot of years researching and testing other ideas about how humans work, specifically in leadership. I was hooking people up to biometric devices and running them through situations to see how their body responded to understand themselves. And we learned a lot of fascinating things. But when it comes to the depth of the human condition, the thing I learned is we're all experimenters on a journey. For example, when it comes to human consciousness, scientists don't even have a clear agreed upon definition. So we have multiple typically disconnected branches of science that are working to solve it. So like you might expect like a neuroscientist and a biologist and a psychologist or sociologist to be debating about this because they study humans. But now we have mathematicians and physicists and even computer scientists in this debate, and they seem to be all pushing in different directions, meaning they don't really have any agreement on this. And I don't see any chance for real agreement on any reasonable time horizon. And maybe there never will be. So the best we have are people who are committed to deep thought and exploration of our experience of life. And I've been working on doing that and helping people with it for a long time now, more than 25 years. So that's what I think makes me unique in that sense.
Now, you've said that the hardest part of finding meaning and purpose is figuring out who you are. How do you approach that problem?
Well, the first thing we do is get rid of the idea that you need to find who you are, like it's somehow hidden somewhere beyond yourself. We start differentiating you from your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your past, your stories, because they're all things you have. Much of that comes from your automatic and habitual survival machine. I spend a lot of energy discovering how your survival machine works because none of us were born with a manual for it. And we do this through a specific lens that kind of helps your survival machine stand out so you can see it. And then once you can see that distinction in yourself, you have space to create who you choose to be and then work on molding your meat, body, and brain to serve you on your chosen journey.
So what's been your most rewarding experience since publishing your book?
I love the letters. I've gotten some of the nicest letters from educators and activists and coaches and young people about some of the ideas and how they've changed their lives. I've had some amazing conversations about the changes people made in their own lives after reading the book. I love to hear those stories. You know, for me, hearing the book's making a difference is both humbling and amazing. But when you hear real people who have tested your ideas and have had these profound transformations, it's an unbelievable feeling.
Now, did your environment or upbringing play any major role in your writing?
I have kind of a special situation. I know there's a lot of people like me, but I was emancipated from my parents when I was 12 after they were divorced. And my mom back in the 1980s came out to be gay. And at that time, it wasn't acceptable to be both gay and a parent. And plus, anyway, my mom kind of decided that being a mom didn't really work well with her newfound lifestyle. And my father was very abusive and a workaholic. And on top of that, I was kind of like the little fat kid without friends dealing with all of this. I had a lot of questions at a very young age and not a lot of family role models besides my grandparents who kind of saved my life by taking me in. So I had a lot of exploration to do to figure out how to grow up and be a person different than what I experienced. And since I was already a strong Catholic at the time, I learned quickly that that wasn't going to give me the answers I was looking for. So that became an advantage because I was able to be open to seriously look at things on my own and be critical to answers that I got. And it ended up that chaos and trauma of my childhood just helped me unveil all the flaws of standard ways of thinking, which set the stage for a more exploratory approach that in the end led to the book.
Now, how would you describe your writing style?
Well, I enjoy walking people down a logical path and using the science and the philosophy and the stories and a workbook style of questions to make the writing practical and applicable to my readers. I want them to be able to be used in everyday life because for me, the information without application, it's nice, but it's not necessarily helpful or useful. So I write with application constantly in mind. So it's always actionable.
What part of your book would you say you personally like best?
That's a great question, and nobody ever asked me it before. In the beginning of the book, I tell a true story about a situation that occurred in World War II, where a German fighter pilot made a critical decision to stay aligned with who he was despite the situation. And that act was not small. It was not easy, and it put his own life in serious danger. Maybe that's even an understatement. But by doing that act, he'd intentionally saved the lives of a severely injured American bomber crew who were the enemy. What I'm going to tell you now isn't in the book, but it gives context to why this is one of my favorite parts. As I said before, I didn't have a lot of positive role models because of my upbringing, so not in my family at least. So I looked other places. And for 3 years in high school, I had a teacher named Mr. Blackford, who was one of the most influential teachers I had in my life. And I wouldn't be who I am today if it weren't for him. Now, had that German pilot not done what he did, Mr. Blackford would have never been born because his father was on that bomber that German saved. So it's not only a great example of how choosing to stay aligned can make a difference beyond what most people imagine, but in that case, it had massive ramifications for me in my own life. That's why it's maybe the favorite part for me of the book, because I'm able to bring that to light.
So in your opinion, who should buy your book?
Well, if you're a person searching for purpose and meaning, and you're willing to step outside your comfort zone, but you need evidence and to know why a concept is important, and you also want a solid and scientifically supported path or a process forward, then this book is definitely for you.
Do you have a website?
I do. It's thealignmentquotient.com.
This has been just great. Our guest today has been Chris Ancona, and he is the author of The Alignment Quotient, How to Create and Powerfully Live a Life You Love. Chris, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Don. Have a great day.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. Go out there, buy The Alignment Quotient today, and please share this interview with your friends so that they too have the opportunity to discover our guests and their work. The Author Show can be accessed at any time at theauthorshow.com. Selected interviews can also be found on major platforms like Amazon Fire TV, the Roku channel, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, and many more. And whether you're an author who would like to be featured or a reader in search of new books to read, The Author Show is a great place to start. Check us daily as we continue to introduce wonderful authors of very interesting books on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. Find out more about authors and their work at theauthorshow.com. Theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.